Colleagues, it's time for us to start our meeting, and we've also formed a quorum. So let's proceed with this meeting of the subcommittee. First of all, election of chairman. Verbal nominations can be made by one member to be at least seconded by one member with acceptance by members. Mr. Frankie Yik, I nominate Mr. Seto. Any seconder? Mr. Poon Siu Ping. I accept the nomination. As I have been nominated and I have accepted it, according to the electoral procedures, I'll invite Mr. Frankie Yik, who is of the highest precedence amongst members at the moment, apart from me, to chair the meeting. Any other nominations? If not, congratulations, Ms. Seto, who is elected chairman. I'll now hand back the chair to you. Thank you, colleagues, for your support. I'd like to seek your views on whether or not this subcommittee needs a deputy chairman. Any views? All right. So members are of the view that we do not need a deputy chairman. So we've concluded the procedures for election of chairman. Thank you, colleagues. Please invite the officials to come in. I'd first like to introduce the attending officials today. Deputy Director of Environmental Protection, Mr. Andrew Lai. Their Assistant Director, Mr. Mok Wai Chun, for Air Policy. And then Senior Environmental Protection Officer for Mobile Source, Dr. Mak Sheng Tat. Besides, at the back, with two more officials, Senior Government Counsel, Mr. Alan Chong, and Government Counsel, Ms. Queenie Wu. Welcome, all of you. It should be the government team for the regulation. We've received notification from Mr. Lee Chak-yan after the deadline that he would like to join the subcommittee. So members, do you agree that we include Mr. Lee Chak-yan? Any opposition? Any objection? No? All right, so we accept Mr. Lee Chak-yan's late application. I'd now like to invite the government officials to brief us on the LegCo brief. Mr. Lai? Thank you, Madam Chairman. I can see that a number of members present here are members of the panel on environmental affairs. So I believe they have a certain degree of understanding of this regulation. But of course, I understand that some of your members have not participated in the previous discussion in the panel. So allow me to review the regulation with you. Oh yes, please give us the details so that we can revisit the issues. Well, Madam Chairman, the regulation is rather simple for pre-Euro, Euro 2 and Euro 3 diesel vehicles. We would like to set a retirement age of rather deadline. After that, there won't be any more renewal of their licenses. And then after the regulation is enacted, all newly registered commercial diesel vehicles can only be used for 15 years at most. Unless these vehicles satisfy the latest vehicular regulatory requirement on emission, they won't get any renewal after that. The main objective is to improve the air the roadside air quality. Allow me to say something about background. Why do we need this measure? Members may be very concerned about one issue. Hong Kong's air quality, overall speaking, in the past few years has been improved. However, roadside air quality is deteriorating because of nitrogen oxides and suspended particulates. For roadside air quality, for the index exceeding 100, 5 years ago, we only got 50-odd days, but last year, over 140 days. We need to face this squarely. In June last year, the WHO announced that the RSPs emitted by diesel vehicles are carcinogenic. And there's a new report from the WHO to the effect that air pollution can cause cancer. Therefore, in order to protect public health, to improve air quality and the environment, we really need to control the emissions from commercial diesel vehicles. With 700,000 of them, only 120,000 are commercial diesel vehicles. As for the RSP emissions, they amount to 90% of roadside air pollution. Nitrogen oxides about half. So if we are to handle roadside pollution and reduce health risks, the first thing we have to do is to regulate commercial diesel vehicles. Now look at those 120,000 commercial diesel vehicles. May I refer you to Annex C of the paper for distribution. Licensed vehicles 120,000, registered 130,000. Among the 130,000, 19,000 pre-Euro, the youngest 18 years old, and then Euro 1, Euro 2, Euro 3, 7 to 18 years old. They are very old. The emission level is very high. How high? I'd like to refer members to Annex B. That is the page in front. Commercial diesel vehicles, different models, RSP emissions and nitrogen oxides emissions. If Euro 4 is the standard, then for pre-Euro vehicles, the emission is 34-fold that of Euro 4. That is, one vehicle equals 4. Pre-Euro for nitrogen oxides, when compared with Euro 4, 2.6 folds of emission. This explains why, in handling the 120 to 130,000 commercial diesel vehicles, we really need to eliminate Euro 3 vehicles and those older, because they are really very old. The emission level is on the high side. I can explain to members that as far as the EPD is concerned, we've always been tackling the emission level of commercial diesel vehicles. Newly registered vehicles have to satisfy the emission standard for Euro 5. If you look at this table, you'll see that Euro 5, when compared with Euro 4, better by 40% insofar as nitrogen oxide emission is concerned. So if we can regularly update diesel commercial vehicles by bringing in new vehicles and enhance our emission standards, it will be very beneficial to our air quality. However, there are two major difficulties here. First of all, for commercial diesel vehicles, we don't have a mandatory elimination date. So the youngest pre-Euro vehicle, 18 years old, oldest 25 years old, they're running on our roads. Secondly, for these old vehicles, the emission level of their design was poor. And these vehicles are under poor repair and maintenance. Therefore, the emission level is much higher than designed. So this regulation is precisely to handle this issue. For the oldest highly polluting diesel vehicles, we're going to set an elimination deadline. And for the newly registered diesel vehicles, they cannot exceed a usage duration of 15 years unless they satisfy the latest emission requirements. Well, 80,000 Euro 3 vehicles, the industry will be hugely affected. In the past, we launched 2 voluntary replacement exercises to encourage vehicles of Euro 1, Euro 2, and Euro 3 vehicles. We provide a subsidy of 10 to 18%. Anyway, it's a voluntary scheme. Not everybody joined. Not everybody was interested. So from 2010, for pre-Euro and Euro 1 replacement, only about 30% of the owners participated. And this year, just in June, we completed our voluntary replacement scheme for Euro 2 diesel vehicles. Only 20% owners joined. So we cannot just rely on a voluntary scheme to effectively eliminate these vehicles. In January this year, in his policy address, the CE mentioned that the government should have a mandatory and subsidized scheme to eliminate these highly polluting vehicles. After that announcement in January, we offered a mandatory replacement scheme and a replacement table as well as a replacement subsidy to encourage owners to replace their vehicles. After the launching of the scheme, the transport industry and electrical members had a lot of views. So we discussed with the industry for half a year and enhanced the scheme with today's proposals. We made reference to the views of the industry and electrical members. Let me cite an example. Compensation, ex gratia payment. There are 3 categories in accordance with the age of the vehicles. 27% to 33% of compensation. When we introduced the scheme in January, the compensation was rather low, ranging from 10% to 30%, depending on the type of vehicles and whether or not new vehicles would be procured. After taking reference from the views of the industry, we would offer more flexibility because the government would like to eliminate the older diesel vehicles. Whether the owners buy a new vehicle should be up to the owners themselves. So the ex gratia payment is now increased. Which page is that? Is the example in Annex D. For different models and different age, the compensation will be from 27% to 33%. We also adopt the views of the industry about giving more time to owners to replace their vehicles. So we use our expression to extend the deadline for replacement.
For heavily polluting vehicles, that is pre-Euro vehicle, they have to be phased out by January 2016. And we have extended for Euro 1, 2, and 3 by 1 year. And I'd like members to support our proposed amendment. You see the timetable for phasing out these vehicles and the ex gratia payment are results of detailed discussions with the electrical and stakeholder. When the Environmental Affairs panel had a meeting on the 2nd of October, we got their support. Major transport stakeholders have written to the electrical stating their support. We understand that this is a consensus, fought for hard. And of course, it will be very difficult or even impossible if we have to forge consensus from the 80,000 vehicle owners. There are views asking for a further extension of the period and more ex gratia payment. But I'd like to say that we have increased the ex gratia payment in the policy address. This year, the chief executive proposed to earmark $10 billion for the replacement scheme. And we were only talking about $9 billion before that. With the revised proposal, that is, the ex gratia payment from 27% to 33%, we are talking about $11.3 billion. We can't buy a new vehicle for owners to replace their old ones. Now, they have been using their vehicles for quite some time, and polluters pay, so we can only pay so much when it comes to ex gratia payment. And of course, for owners, they would like to have more time, maybe 2027. But we are earmarking $12 billion to subsidize the replacement, and we have extended the period. If we further extend the period, then we will disappoint the public and relevant stakeholders who are waiting for cleaner air when all these are in place. So we can't extend the deadline further. We have explained to members about the background and the process, and I asked members for their support. Well, it's strange that even the EPD said that it is obtained after fighting hard. This is for negative vetting, but it only comes into effect in February next year. First of all, maybe we will explain the legislative process to members. Well, the date of scrutiny period, the deadline is the 27th of November. And date of giving notice to amend the subsidiary legislation is the 20th of November. If an extension is needed, then we can extend it to the 18th of December when it comes to the expiry of the scrutiny period. I think we have to have an extension. Today is the 14th. It's impossible for us to finish the scrutiny before the 27th of November. I think the administration expects an extension. Yes. You said that you have done a lot of consultation, and it is the result of fighting hard for long, but still, don't take it for granted. Yes, it is a negative vetting, and the regulation will come into effect in February next year, and we can extend the scrutiny period till 18th of December. Well, if there is an extension and if it is to be voted on, the voting date, the latest, will be the 18th of December. If there are no amendments, then in February it will come into effect. What about, will we have another chance before the actual commencement date to see if everything is in place? No. Well, in clause 1 of the regulations, it says that on the 1st of February next year it will come into effect. And if you think the 1st of February is too close, then of course you can amend the commencement date. There was a discussion in the panel asking the administration to go to the FC for funding approval of the $10 billion so that it can be done as soon as possible. Mr. Lai, can you explain to us? As the Chief Executive said in his policy address, the phasing out of old and polluting commercial vehicles is done by way of a subsidy. It's on a voluntary basis. if we get support of a mandatory phasing out of commercial diesel vehicles, then when the regulation is endorsed, we will, as soon as possible, apply for funding approval of the ex gratia payment. So whether the regulation is endorsed is linked to the issuance of ex gratia payment. I'll ask some more about the timetable before I open the floor. When will you go to the Finance Committee after the regulation is endorsed? If the regulation is endorsed in middle of December, we will be able to go to the FC in January. Let me read out some names: Gary Chan, Wu Chi Wai, Tony Tse, Poon Siu Ping, Frankie Yik. These members would like to ask questions. I'll give you 7 minutes each. Now try to be as lenient as possible. Mr. Gary Chan. Thank you. I'm happy to hear from the administration that they have taken on board views expressed and they have simplified this already complicated scheme. The administration described this scheme as something that they have fought long and hard for. Still, there are different views from the trade. And I'd like to take the opportunity to tell you some of the voices I've heard. Of course, we support a cleaner Hong Kong with clean air, but we should not take the jobs from the sector. I'd like to see if the administration will consider this about the service life of 15 years. Whether it is new or old, they will have to be phased out at 15 years. Perhaps the vehicle was purchased a long time ago, and at the time when it was purchased, the owner did not know about this service life limit. We're talking about owners of one single vehicle or SMEs. The ex gratia payment is not enough for them to buy another new vehicle. Car dealers are very smart. Well, soon as they know that we have $10 billion as subsidies, they will put on hold sales of vehicles, or they may even increase the price. If, upon examination, the vehicle is found to meet the tightest EPD standard when it comes to emission, even when the car with the vehicles is 16 or 17, will the owners be allowed to keep using the vehicle instead of requiring them to phase out their car at the end of 15 years? Will they be allowed 1 or 2 years to replace their vehicles? Mr. Lai? I thank Mr. Chan for his questions about the service life limit of 15 years. Let me once again explain it clearly. There are two parts under this regulation. First, after the regulation is endorsed, say for example, starting from the 1st of February, all new diesel commercial vehicles will have a service life limit of 15 years. And if the vehicle after 15 years can still meet the emission standard at that time, upon examination, then they are allowed to circulate in the road. Well, can I ask a question here? So after the regulation is endorsed, if the vehicle is 16 years old, and if the vehicle meet the emission standards, then they will not have to be phased out. For newly registered diesel commercial vehicles, after the enactment of the regulation, it will have a service life of 15 years, and what you said is true. About the old ones, for existing ones, pre-Euro, Euro 1, 2, or 3, the designed emission standard is very poor, as I've explained before. The emission is several times or dozens of times more polluting than a Euro 5. That's why, through the ex gratia payment, we subsidize vehicle owners to replace the old vehicles. They are for pre-Euro to Euro 3. There are 4 deadlines for phasing them out. Apart from the Euro 3 vehicles, when they have about 15 years, all the other older ones, say pre-Euro ones. The youngest is 18, the oldest is 25. We ask them to phase it out no later than December 2015. The license will not be renewed after that. For Euro 1, we're talking about 15 to 18-year-old ones. So for existing vehicles, apart from Euro 3 vehicles, by the deadline of December 2015, we are talking about at least 15-year-old cars, 15-year-old vehicles, and they've been in service for many years. Of course, we understand that when the vehicle was purchased, they did not know that there was a forced retirement date. And that's why we propose ex gratia payment as a compensation. When the regulation is endorsed, or newly registered diesel commercial vehicle, there will be a 15-year service life. All owners who purchase new vehicles will know, so this ex gratia payment is only on a one-off basis. Can you tell me about pre-Euro vehicles and Euro 1? How many are there circulating the road? Please refer to Annex C. You will see the model and the distribution of different types. Mr. Lai said that for newly registered vehicles after 2014, they will have, as long as they meet the emission standard, they are allowed to circulate on the road. Newly registered diesel commercial vehicles registered after the 1st of February 2014, on principle, their license will not be renewed 15 years after the first date of registration. However, if there are some retrofitting devices put in, and after they have reached the 15-year period, as long as they meet the then emission standard, then their license will be renewed. Well, I think at that time we're talking about at least Euro 5, because currently the emission standard is Euro 5. So when you buy new vehicles, from now on, it's at least Euro 5. So before the 1st of February 2014, for newly registered cars, if they are Euro 4 or Euro 3, and no matter how much retrofitting work is done, they will not be able to meet Euro 5 standard, so they will have to be phased out after 15 years. Well, let me say this. If you want to import a new diesel vehicle in Hong Kong, or a second-hand diesel commercial vehicle, you will have to meet the Euro 5 emission standard.
Other colleagues, Mr. Chan Hak-kan has another question which you have not answered yet. Replacement deadline. Can you be more lenient? We've actually relaxed it once. As I explained, 20,000 pre-Euro vehicles, we insisted that the deadline should be the 1st of January 2016. For Euro 1, Euro 2, and Euro 3 vehicles, After discussing with the industry and electrical members for more than half a year, we have already extended the deadline by a year. And the administration has allocated $3 billion for additional ex gratia payment. So with that extension, if we are to further extend the deadline, we do have huge difficulties. Mr. Tony Tse. Thank you, Madam Chairman. For pre-Euro vehicles, to assist their replacement, I really support the proposal from the administration. But I have a question. When this regulation is to be implemented, what about car scrapping and car assembly? What about those two industries? Has the administration assessed whether or not they can cope, because a number of vehicles will be involved? And then Section 6 spells out the exemption. Our Secretariat has asked some questions about that. Well, if the EPD receives an exemption application, normally how will you go about it? What are the administrative arrangements? Can you tell us what criteria will be adopted for the granting of exemption? And if the applicant is not satisfied with this decision, is there any appeal mechanism? Mr. Lai? Thank you for the two questions. My assistant director will answer your second question. About car scrapping and car assembly, we did talk to the industry in the past year or so. We talked to the vehicle owners, the banks that offer loans, members of the assembly industry, etc. We did talk to them because we're all worried about their capacity. After talking to them, we feel that by and large, with this extension of the deadline, these industries deem the new deadline feasible. For the car scrapping and assembly industries, we talked to them about employment of workers. They asked whether the government can assist them in recruiting more workers. Otherwise, they'll be like sunset industries with very old members. So we've asked the Labour Department to support us by launching placement seminars, exhibitions, recruitment exhibitions, etc. For vehicle assembly, we're talking about 80,000 vehicles in this exercise. Over half of them are light goods vans, so they don't need any more assembly. Medium and heavy vehicles and tourist coaches need to be reassembled. So the number of vehicles to be reassembled won't be as large as 80,000. And after absorbing the views of the industries, we'll have some flexibility. For the ex gratia payment, it will be given to the owner that sends his vehicle for scrapping. But there'll be flexibility as to whether he will buy a new vehicle and when he'll do so. Well, when the euros and Japanese yens are more expensive, these vehicle owners may want to delay the procurement of new vehicles. So this new scheme is more flexible than the old one. Mr. Mok will answer the next question about exemption. Madam Chairman, concerning exemption, is only in very exceptional circumstances that the director will exercise this discretion. Well, there are such possibilities, but chances slim. Now, if a vehicle is not used, you have to understand that it is a commercial vehicle. So very often the owner will need a replacement vehicle such that he can continue with his business. So it's only in very special circumstances. For example, when there are problems with vehicle supply. So it's not because the owner doesn't want to buy a new vehicle. Well, maybe there are problems with the ships. So there may be delay. So the authority will consider exercising a discretion and grant an exemption. So will the authority's decision be the final decision? Well, under the ordinance, there is an appeal mechanism. If any owner is not satisfied with the authority's decision, there is an appeal board for him to appeal, and then the appeal board will reconsider the case. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Wu Chi-wai? Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to offer a few comments. First of all, about paragraph 6 of the paper, which was discussed in the Environmental Affairs panel in relation to the retirement time. We asked whether earlier replacement should be encouraged. That is, if a Euro 1 vehicle owner chooses to replace his vehicle on the 1st of January 2016, he'll get fully paid. But if he defer that by a year, the ex gratia payment will be less. So can we use this as a tool of adjustment such that there'll be more economic incentives for the owners to replace their vehicles? Besides, I learned from some members of the industry that these owners may have to buy new vehicles. Now, for commercial vehicles, 70% is quite a high percentage. Can we make use of the SME Guarantee Loan Fund to offer more concessions in terms of interest rates so that these owners can continue to operate their business? My third question is, this regulation is about the replacement of diesel vehicles. From certain information made available to us and from previous discussions, we learned that if the fuel is to be changed, for example, if the government considers diesel not feasible anymore and mandatorily requires owners to change to natural gas, then what should happen? Diesel vehicle engines may be very easily transferred to natural gas vehicles. So the owner will get the subsidy and at the same time allow their vehicles to continue to run. Mr. Lai, I'd like to thank the member for the 3 questions. For incentives for the early birds, we did think about the issue, but we don't want the scheme to be too complicated. And for the retirement timetable, it's not too long, but not too short either. For the 20,000 per euro vehicles, we hope that they'll be completely eliminated by the 1st of January 2016, so 2 odd years from now. So if you want incentives for early birds, in terms of actual implementation, that may not be very easy. May I refer members to the calculation of the ex gratia payment in Annex D. Originally, we have 5 classes, vehicles of different ages. The younger vehicles will get more, the older vehicles less. After listening to the industry, the 5 bands were converted to the existing 3. 16 years or above, 13 to 16 years with 30% of compensation. For those below 13 years, 33% of the price of new vehicles. So we want to eliminate Euro 3 diesel vehicles and those older. But in fact, the payment is pegged to the age of the vehicle. Now, if a Euro 3 vehicle is to be scrapped next year, at the age of 12 to 13 years, it will get 33% of compensation. But the deadline is the 1st of January 2020. The owner can use the vehicle up to the deadline. So if it is 16 years old, he'll only get 17%. So the owners will look at the level of compensation when they plan the date of replacement. The later they come, the less they get. And then the vehicles may rise in price. And maintenance cost, insurance cost, etc. are higher for the older vehicles. So at the end of the day is a decision for the owner himself. So the payment is pegged to the age of the vehicles, not to the model of the vehicle. So this is already an incentive for early birds. For financial arrangements, we did talk to some banks. At the moment, banks find it very difficult to lend money because of the property market, and so banks are very willing to offer loans. At the moment, the down payment can only be as little as 10%, and then there are concessionary interest rates as well. Upon the launching of the scheme, the banks hope to offer more concessions to owners. That is, more choices to the owners. Well, the 20% compensation rate for new vehicles should render it not difficult for vehicles to take out loans. We already discussed with the Trade and Industry Department, which operates a guarantee loan fund for SMEs. For logistics companies, we asked the department whether they can come forward to apply for loans. At the next meeting, we can report back on whether or not their answer is in the affirmative. And then for car technology is ever advancing, we now have electric cars, but only up to light goods vans. For medium and heavy lorries, we don't yet have electric vehicles. So as far as this regulation is concerned, it's only to regulate commercial diesel vehicles. As for other types of vehicles that come into Hong Kong, if the emission level is good enough, this regulation is not intended to cover them.
This regulation targets diesel commercial vehicles. They will have a service life of 15 years. If there are different types of vehicles of the same emission standard, then the service life may be beyond 15 years. Is that right? Yes, Mr. Wu's understanding is correct. In this regulation, it only targets diesel commercial vehicles. If there are commercial electric cars or commercial LPG vehicles, unless the government introduce regulations on the service life of these vehicles and they're endorsed by the LegCo, we cannot control the service life of those other vehicles. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. I'm not a member of that panel, and these issues might have been discussed before. And just now, members have asked some questions, and I'm not going to repeat them. We support improving air quality and protecting public health. But how do we strike a balance between that and the interest of the trade? The administration talked about consensus, and some people from the trade approached me to ask questions about the service life of 15 years. And they said that, well, the cost of buying a car, including a mortgage payment, is about $2 million. And you use emission as a standard. Technology advances. There may be new technology that enables a car to have a longer service life by some kind of retrofitting device. So will there be exemption in place that a vehicle owner can apply to the department for an exemption? Well, the phase 1 ex gratia payment has stopped, and the revised ex gratia payment under the new scheme will be in place starting from the 1st of February next year. Is there a retrospective period? In other words, well, I have to have the vehicle examination in January, and the vehicles is not yet replaced, or well, when the vehicle's examined in January and it has to be replaced, and there is only a difference of 1 month, will the ex gratia payment be paid? Will there be a retrospective effect? Yes, there will be exemptions for the exemption of service life of 15 years, yes. Vehicles may be retrofitted with new devices, or there may be new technologies in place that render the vehicle able to meet the emission standard. Say, for example, after 15 years is March 2029, theoretically the vehicle will have to be phased out. But if the vehicle meets the emission standard in 2029, then the vehicle will be allowed to circulate. But we are target-based. If the vehicle meets the latest emission standard, then there is a flexibility for the vehicle license to be renewed, and it doesn't have to be phased out. The second part, about a vehicle examination. I think we're talking about the examination once every 12 years of coaches. When it comes to vehicle examinations under the Transport Department, it is done under the principle of protecting passengers. It's difficult for us to ask them to change that. When it comes to new coaches, there is a service life of 15 years. So will there be some kind of adjustments of the 12-year examination? The TD has undertaken that they would take that into consideration. What about the retrospective effect? Well, if the regulation takes effect in February next year, and when the vehicle has to go through examination in January, well, of course, unless the vehicle is scrapped, it will have to go through the vehicle. Then EPD has drawn the line in June 2016, and perhaps, well, if the vehicle owner thinks that I'm not going to take the car for examination, I don't think that will be appropriate. Vehicle safety is very important. We can't tell them not to take the car for examination, but as to what happens with the time in between, the TD has already started speaking to the sector. The examination can be a simplified one, and they will only look at some important points, say for example rusts And if there are rusty parts, I don't think the public would think it's appropriate not to examine the car. But if there is no rusty part, there will be a simple examination. I think there is, in general, some kind of consensus. And as to when it will be finally implemented, the TD is aware that they would like to get some the public would like to get some more information about this. When we talk about exemption, the general examination, etc., I asked the administration to give us an information paper. If I read the electrical brief, they only talk about the regulation and the legislation. Not any of these are supporting measures. The administration said that in the EAP, there was already a very thorough discussion on the service life of 15 years. But there is nothing on paper about supporting facilities. Please give us a written. Please give us an information paper after the meetings for our future reference. Mr. Frankie Yik. I represent the transport sector. I've been talking with the TD. The message they give us is that they agree with the final proposal of the administration. And I met another group today. They are from the retail sector. They've raised some issues that are similar to what Mr. Gary Chan said. The first point, service life of 15 years. I know that on the mainland they use 15 years, Singapore 20 years for commercial vehicles. So do we have to start with 15 years? They think 15 years will have a major impact on them. Well, I am now reflecting their views to you. Can there be some room to maneuver? Can it be pushed back a bit? And I noticed that there are some amendments to the provisions. I was not in previous meeting. Say, on the 16th year, in a vehicle examination, if the vehicle is found to meet the then emission standard, then license will be renewed. There may be advancement in technology, say for example catalytic converter, or perhaps the engine can be replaced. Say the vehicle body is the same but with an Euro 8 engine. They don't have a view of the deadline for pre-Euro. But when it comes to Euro 1, 2, 3, they ask for an extension. And these are their arguments. That business is difficult for them. So they don't very often go to buy new cars. They will only get second-hand cars to continue with the operation. And what if they can't buy second-hand cars because all of them have been scrapped? So can the deadline for Euro 1, 2, 3 be extended a little bit? And I've explained to them. And they accept my constituency accept the proposal from the administration, but they still would like to know whether there is any elbow room for further adjustment. Service life. We've had a lot of discussions with political parties, the trade and electrical. When we first proposed 15 years, we took into account 2 points. First, overseas practice. Hong Kong is an exception. In a lot of countries, even for Asian countries, when it comes to commercial vehicles, they have put a service life limit, because for commercial vehicles is used more often than private vehicles. So the wear and tear is a lot quicker and emission is heavier. Singapore, 10 years ago, they've already put in place a service life of 20 years for lorries. Taxis, 8 years. New York City, cabs, 6 years. Mainland, heavy-duty vehicles, 15 years. If there are requirements of service line, and there is already emission standard, and this year the World Health Organization confirmed that air pollution is one of the causes for cancer, and we all think that the service life of 15 years is appropriate. And when we talk to the transport sector, they told us that the biggest concern of this mandatory phase-out scheme is that when the vehicle was purchased 10 years ago, they did not know about the deadline, and all of a sudden they're told to phase out that car. Of course, they do not like it, and they would ask for compensation. But for new vehicles, if it's made clear to them the service life 15-20 years, then they would take that into account when they buy a new vehicle, and they will work out the cost. So the objection in this regard is less strong. And of course, if you ask them, they prefer 20 years to 15. But let's look. But if we take into account NXC, there are about 20,000 pre-Euro vehicles that are 18 years old. Their emission is 34 times of other Euro standards in terms of respiratory particulates. For Euro 1, 2, 3, we have heard views of the LegCo and the sector. Our proposal is to extend it by 1 year compared to the proposal in January, and the administration will earmark $3 billion to increase the ex gratia payment. If the service life is extended further, then for people who would like to trade cleaner air with money, they will be disappointed. Well, the group of people from the sector said that they understand that for logistics and other commercial vehicles, the mileage is high. But for them, they only transport chicken, transport fruit and vegetable to the market. So there is only 1 trip a day. The extension may be reasonable. For Euro 1, 2 or pre-Euro, yes, they have to be phased out. Well, but we're talking about Euro 5 or 6, 10 years after the enactment of the regulation.
Euro 5 and 6, when compared with Euro 4, are not really much better in terms of percentage above the standard. So I really want you to go back and reconsider your proposal. Madam Chairman, I'd like to thank Mr. Yik for his comments. Yes, the 20-odd thousand vehicles, lorries, trucks, school bus, goods vehicles, or vehicles that transport vegetables for a few trips every year, as Mr. Yik said. But so long as there are Euro 3 vehicles or older, they are below standard. I mean below the present standard. But if you compare the 80,000 vehicles among themselves, some owners will say, oh, I only own a school bus which runs 2 trips per day, or I only run 1 trip early in the morning before the market opens. Yet, it is very difficult for us to draw very clear lines as to whether or not we should give, say, a couple more years for certain vehicles. So there are difficulties here. Mr. Yu Si-wing, Madam Chairman, from the figures given by the government, we can see that for pre-Euro, Euro 1 and Euro 2 vehicles, there are quite many of them. Light goods vans, 30,000. Medium lorries, 10,000. Well, when the regulation commences in February, we may have a lot of vehicle owners wanting to replace their vehicles, and the market may run out of supply, and then many owners may not be able to replace their vehicles. Well, we're talking about 30,000 LGVs to be replaced at the same time. So what measures will be adopted to address the problem, to guard against speculation or hoarding, such that some owners don't get new vehicles? And then for the phased-out vehicles, will I get some subsidy to alleviate my burden? And then in 2007, it may be a Euro 4 vehicle, but the equipment is Euro 3. Now, with this exercise, Euro 3 vehicles can be replaced earlier. All right. If it changes back to Euro 3, does the government have any standard for replacement? Because Euro 3 vehicles also affect air quality. So if the design itself is Euro 3, can the owner replace his vehicle earlier? My fourth question is, are all vehicles covered? I heard that double-decker buses will not be covered. So 4 questions altogether. Mr. Lai, thank you for the question. Mr. Mok will explain about Euro 3 vehicles. As for the other 3 questions, I can say this. For vehicle supply, Hong Kong is an open and free market. In the next 7 years, 80,000 vehicles will have to be replaced. That is a huge business opportunity. The industry does have incentives to introduce better vehicles from other jurisdictions, from foreign jurisdictions, even from mainland China. So we hope that with a diversified market, consumers can get best choices. Secondly, this exercise covers what vehicles? Basically, is to cover all commercial diesel vehicles. But franchised buses will not be covered. Why? It's not that we want to treat franchise bus companies better. The main reason is that we have a special arrangement with the franchised bus companies. For Euro 2 and Euro 3 buses, the government will subsidize them to convert RSB and nitrogen oxides to above Euro 4 standard. So by way of this bus retrofitting exercise, we would like our franchised buses to attain at least Euro 4 standard. $550 million have already been approved by LegCo for this replacement exercise by franchised bus companies, which are now tendering for procurement and tests. As for Euro 1 buses, we obtained information from the franchised bus companies that latest by the 1st of January next year, all such buses will be replaced because the franchised bus companies have their own replacement plans. Their buses won't run for more than 18 years. So overall speaking, the exercise will satisfy all our emission requirements. As for the ex gratia payment, the existing arrangement is very simple. All qualified Euro 3 vehicles or older vehicles, so long as they, before the specified retirement deadline, return their license to us, they'll get the ex gratia payment. There's no stipulation that a new vehicle has to be immediately procured for operation. So long as they surrender their license, that means the polluting source is got rid of, then they'll get the ex gratia payment. Compensation, ex gratia payment for retrofitting into Euro 3 vehicles, Mr. Mock? Well, we heard two groups of opinion from the industry. Some said that their Euro 4 vehicles were first registered as Euro 4 vehicles, but during the Euro 3 period. But then they don't want to be regulated. So when we assess whether it is Euro 3 or Euro 4 is quite confusing for the owners. In future, we're facing 80,000 vehicles. It's very difficult to define the model. So we base our calculation on the first registration date. In Hong Kong, this has been used for many, many years and have proved to be sound. Under the existing laws, pre-Euro diesel vehicles must have a device to reduce the RSP emissions. So we do have a first registration date for that license. For pre-Euro, Euro 1 and Euro 2 vehicles, they have a voluntary replacement scheme. So how do we define pre-Euro, Euro 1 or Euro 2 models? Again, we use the first registration date. Why? Because we want the owners to be clear about what level of ex gratia payment they will get and what the replacement deadline is. Otherwise, there will be confusion. So after deliberation, we came to the conclusion that we should continue to use the system that will not confuse us or the owners. That is, to use the first registration date to define the model. The industry also accepts this arrangement because at the moment, if they use pre-Euro vehicles, they also base the model on the first registration date. Mr. Yu Si-wing, follow up? Madam Chairman, just now 80,000 pre-Euro to Euro 3 vehicles were mentioned. But for replacement, you'll be talking about almost 50,000 vehicles. I'm still worried that the suppliers will try to control price on seeing such a huge demand. Of course, we are a free and open economy. I believe that there should be measures to guard against such control or manipulation, because the suppliers understand very well that the owners have to approach them for new vehicles. Mr. Lee Chia-yan, Madam Chairman, I agree to Mr. Yu Si-wing's concern. Let me first say that this had been discussed many times previously. I recall that even at the first discussion, we already mentioned Mr. Yu Si-wing's concern. The industry said, give me the money first. Once the deadline comes, I will lose the payment if I don't get rid of my vehicles. And within those 2 years, I can choose when to buy a new vehicle. So I'll get more time and more room for maneuvering. So back then, we asked the administration to use a longer duration as an incentive. You see, in 3 years' time, they have to get rid of their old vehicles. So they say, give me the ex gratia payment first. Sooner or later, I'll get it. Why not give me earlier? So once I get the money, if the market is okay, I'll immediately buy. If the market is not okay, I'll buy in the next 3 years. Well, I don't know whether this is a good method. You'll recall that we did raise this with you. Secondly, you may say that my proposal is not feasible. If that's the case, how are you going to address this particular concern of Mr. Yu? Well, Mr. Lai wants diversification. But no matter how many choices you have, all those choices may be expensive. Well, even for Korean cars, some of their brands may still be very expensive. Oh yes, in future you have a diversified market, but all products are expensive, and some brands may not be in Hong Kong yet, but when they see Hong Kong as a good market, they will come. And then there is this so-called cliff problem. You said that you use the first registration date of the license as the deadline or as your basis of calculation. All right, the final date is the 1st of January 2020. Now, if I replace my license in November 2019, I can go all the way up to November 2020, or from July 2019 to July 2020. So the vehicles won't be phased out on the same day. There's actually a duration for phasing out. And then for this retirement age for Euro 5, for these old vehicles. Now, you're saying 15 years, or if you meet the prevailing emission standard, you'll be all right. All Euro 5 vehicles will meet your standard. But the so-called improved vehicles may not be able to reach your standard. So can you explain the technical details to us so that we know what Euro 5 vehicles are all about? Well, if the older models keep running, the conditions of the vehicles may deteriorate. So to what extent I can use my old vehicles? Because the limit is 15 years. Some people will say, because I already own a Euro 5 vehicle, why should I be subject to this 15-year lifespan limit or service life limit? And then what about possible rising vehicle prices? And then whether or not the phasing out period is long enough for people to replace their cars. Mr. Lai, Madam Chairman, concerning the license and phasing out vehicles, my colleague Mr. Mok will deal with them in a moment. Now, we did consider different options. For the ex gratia payment, Mr. Lee said we should give the owner the ex gratia payment first before scrapping. Of course, you say that the deadline for scrapping is already fixed because the license will not be renewed. But then our difficulty is within a certain period of time, we will have an increased number of commercial diesel vehicles, including both new and old vehicles. There will be a huge impact on our road system.
Under the existing arrangement is 1-for-1. For an old vehicle scrapped, a ex gratia payment will be paid, and a new vehicle will be purchased. We have better control on the number of vehicles. Let me interrupt here. What I meant was not to allow all the new vehicles to be circulating in the road. As soon as the ex gratia payment is used to buy the new vehicle, then the old one will no longer be used. Is it possible? It's not the case that the two vehicles will be running on the road. Mr. Lai. Under the current arrangement, there is a lot of flexibility for owners. We're not asking all 80 owners to replace their vehicles at the same time. There are 4 types: pre-Euro, Euro 1, 2, and 3. For each one, apart from Euro 3, we're talking about 10 to 20,000 vehicles. So the pace of replacement is in an orderly manner. We also give the choice to owners. For owners of Euro 3, they can replace their vehicles before the 1st of January 2020, but they don't have to wait till that day. Say 3 years. In 3 years, there is a serious depreciation of Japanese yen, then they may replace their vehicles then. Under the ex gratia payment, we have already given the greatest flexibility to owners. If there is a change in the global economic environment, in 2015 for the logistic market has changed. When the vehicles is scrapped, they will receive the ex gratia payment. They can continue to work as drivers before buying their own. So the flexibility is much more than before. For Mr. Lee's first 2 questions, they are based on the premise whether there is a sufficient supply of new vehicles. If not, then we will have to find ways to enable owners to buy new ones. If you refer to Annex C, let's use a light goods vehicle as an example. There are close to 50,000 vehicles. But you have to bear in mind that out of the 50,000 vehicles, we have 6 years to retire them. So on average, we're talking about 5,000. And if you look at 80,000, most of them are light goods vehicles. And Mr. Lai explained that there isn't much to be done on light goods vehicles. So there shouldn't be any problems for the 80,000 vehicles. Of course, for the sector, whether it is ex gratia payment paid first or later, well, there is still a problem of choice. But we would like to get to be clearer and with more certainty, and for vehicles to be replaced as soon as possible so that we can have cleaner air. We've got support from the sector and different groups. Mr. Lee said that Euro 5 vehicles are quite good already. Let me ask you to turn to Annex B. Euro 4. NOx is 1. Euro 5 is 0.6. We always talk about nitrogen oxide and NOx. If you talk about Euro 6, it's not 0. It's not 0.6. It's 0.12. For the RSP, Euro 6 is 0.5. That is, it's halved. So in the EAP panel, members said that our AQO wasn't too good. We have to gear towards the ultimate objectives of the WHO to protect public health. But if we are to do that, we cannot stay at Euro 5 or 6. We should put in more measures to require cars to be of newer standards. Vehicles will have to be retrofitted so that they can meet the latest standard. We need to further improve our air quality, and I hope members will support us. We need to have more data. Mr. Yu made a calculation and said 30,000, and you said that 50,000 vehicles over a period of 6 years. But the problem is that it may not be evenly distributed. Maybe at the beginning there will be a peak when everyone scramble to replace their vehicles, just like what Mr. Yu said. And then my next point, Euro 6 is already in the market. You should encourage the sector to buy Euro 6. I don't know how you can do that. In 15 years' time, if emission is 0.5 and 0.12, and if it's better than 0.5 or 0.12, then even Euro 5 or 6 will not meet the standard. And perhaps, well, you said that the prevailing standard should apply. And if it is higher than Euro 6, then Euro 6 cars will not meet the standard, and they will have to be retired. And we know full well that the emission standard will not be lower than Euro 6. Now there is Euro 6 in the market. How can you encourage people to buy Euro 6? I don't know how much they cost. So what about the peak? How many vehicles will be scrapped and purchased? And is there a sufficient supply? Of course there will be sufficient supply, but at a very high price. And only car dealers will benefit as a result. We don't want to see that. Well, we may have a lot of time, but I still ask officials to be brief. And the trade has talked to us about this, about the crash or the peak. Some people from the sector say that for pre-Euro vehicle owners, if you rely on such an old vehicle, the owner may not replace the vehicle. We can't have an accurate estimate, but there is estimate from the trade. They wonder whether there will be as high as 80% of the vehicles being replaced. Some old vehicles may simply be retired. Some owners may not continue with their business. Of course, there may be a peak when, under two circumstances, say for example where there are two vehicles of the same year. Well, it's similar to what you say about the vehicle license, Cliff. Well, when the license expires, then they will renew the license and they may replace the vehicle. They will do things in accordance with the expiry date of the vehicle license. So let's look at the number of vehicles that will expire in a certain year. For pre-Euro cars, if we believe what the sector say, for pre-Euro and Euro 1, for these two types, the time is tight. We give at least 2 years to pre-Euro. If you say that most pre-Euro cars will simply be retired without being replaced, then the problem is small. We're only talking about 5,000. Some may be simply retired. The crucial time is the beginning, and the problem will still be small. The Hong Kong market is small. There are many different models. We don't use specific standards. We adopt international standard. And for car assembly or car body building, there may be a bottleneck. Well, if they know the timetable earlier, then they will prepare the parts for them to be built in Hong Kong. And now we have extended it for Euro 3. I think there won't be any problems. Mr. Kenneth Leung, please refer to Annex C. Euro 4, 35.5% of all commercial diesel vehicles. The age ranges from 0 to 7 years. Well, for these Euro 4 cars, they are already in Hong Kong before February 2014. Do they have a service life of 15 years, or do they have to meet emission standard for Euro 4 vehicles? For the mandatory retirement scheme, it applies only to registered Euro 3 or earlier vehicles. We're talking about a Euro 4 for these 46,000 vehicles. They cannot get ex gratia payment under the scheme. But under the regulation, it will come into effect in February 2014. The newly registered vehicles will be regulated by the 15 years. For existing Euro 4 vehicles, there is no service life limit. But you need a strategy to deal with this batch of vehicles, because after 5 or 6 years, the emission of a Euro 4 may be higher. Where you said for under Annex B for Euro 4, the RSP is 1 and NOx is 1. But if there is wear and tear, the engine gets old, you cannot allow these vehicles to circulate in the road in 10 or 8 years. So, is there a requirement for diesel commercial vehicles to go through examinations 7 years or what?
For vehicle examination, for commercial diesel vehicles, they have to be checked every year. For the coaches, a general examination every 12 years. The whole vehicle has to be disassembled for examination. I understand your concern about the emissions from Euro 4 and Euro 5 vehicles. Your understanding is absolutely reasonable. We would now like to have councillors' support for handling 2/3 of the oldest vehicles and their pollution. As for Euro 4, Euro 5 vehicles, Mr. Leung's concern is correct. In future, they will become the high-emission vehicles, and they will become the old vehicles to be replaced. At this juncture, the government has not yet got any plan to handle the Euro 4, Euro 5 vehicles. That is, when they should be eliminated. But of course, a number of years from now, that will become our concern. But now we have to handle the most polluting vehicles, because 130,000 diesel vehicles cannot be handled in one go and at the same time. 35.5% for Euro 4 vehicles. Years of service, 0 to 7 years. For those driving Euro 4 vehicles, as there are now Euro 6, these owners may want to replace their vehicles. In fact, many people replace their cars in 7 years' time, some even in 3 to 4 years' time. So for a 7-year-old car, there won't be any subsidy. So even for Euro 4 vehicles, if the owner voluntarily wants to replace it by Euro 6, any incentives from you to support these people who are dedicated to clean air for Hong Kong? You see, 7-year vehicles can also be phased out. Mr. Lai? Mr. Leung's view is rather forward-looking. Previously, we had 2 voluntary replacement exercises. And just in June, is for Euro 2 vehicles between 10 to 12 years old. Now, let's not talk about Euro 5. For Euro 4 vehicles, if they are 6 to 7 years old, they shouldn't be given priority in terms of subsidy or incentive. We must handle the older vehicles first. But Mr. Leung needs not worry. Second-hand vehicles should be offered beautiful prices, so to speak, after the implementation of this exercise, this replacement exercise. Well, what about 2016, 17, 2018, 19? We are worried that vehicle prices may escalate. Well, let's look at our competition law. What about price fixing? If that is to occur, would you please communicate with the law enforcement authority to ask them to do something? Yes, Hong Kong is a free and open economy, but we should guard against price manipulation by certain car companies. Well, theoretically, you want people to buy more cars rather than to have higher vehicle prices. So please talk to the law enforcement authority of the competition law. I also have a question, that is procedures for vehicle examination. Before and after the implementation of the regulation, when you examine even the Euro 5 vehicles, many people have been saying that immediately after the examination, the vehicle examined is very all right. But perhaps by the end of the day, the standard has already dropped again, because some car companies or garages just do some cosmetic touch for the vehicle for the sake of examination. And in less than a week's time, the vehicle concerned is again emitting waste gases. So if you rely on the examination to decide whether or not the vehicle concerned should be eliminated in 15 years' time, there may be a problem. So, administration, you know we have put this on our agenda. So when we scrutinize this regulation, we can follow this up. But even in the panel, we'll follow this up very forcefully. And what about prosecution figures? Every year, how many prosecutions are there for over-polluting vehicles which have actually passed the examination. So how many vehicles have been caught by you on the street? Well, the figure will show or may show that there are problems with your examination. Colleagues, now I'd like to seek your views on whether we should hold public hearings. 19th of November, well, it's too urgent because that will be Tuesday. If next Tuesday, and then 26th of November at 4:30 p.m., a more reasonable date, 12 days from now, and the Secretariat can invite the relevant deputations to come. So if we take the 26th of November, we can have 2 more slots for our meeting, 28th of November and the 5th of December, both at 4:30 p.m. Yes, 26th of November, 4:30 for public hearing. But of course, I have to ask you whether we need a public hearing first. So the answer is yes. 19th of November is too much in a hurry. 26th of November. Administration, 2 working days before the 19th of November, that is latest by Monday. Can you give us the paper? It's quite meaningless to table the paper on the 19th of November. So I suggest we don't call a meeting on the 19th of November. Any objection? Because I'm worried that the administration may not be ready with this paper. All right, so 26th of November, 4:30 p.m., public hearing. If any colleague wants to invite any deputation, please contact the Secretariat. Otherwise, we'll stick to the old list of deputations and ask whether or not they're interested to come again. And then 28th of November, 5th of December, both at 4:30 p.m. for 2 more meetings, all right? The regulation is not too complicated. I think 2 more meetings will be enough. Any supplement, any more questions? If not, meeting adjourned today. Thank you very much.